of Office Hours. Today is the 31st episode of this little show, and I am so happy to have you here with me. If this is your first visit to my virtual office, I am glad. If it's your 31st visit, I'm also super glad. Hi, everybody. Today, as with other days, we're going to be answering 3 of your hot off the grill Game Master Stumpers. Your questions about NPCs and themes and rules about games that make you play roles, or maybe don't. We're going to be answering some questions today, and these questions come from you, my most beloved audience. You're my favorite PCs. That's right, you're the PC of your own game. You're nobody's NPC. You don't sell potions. No. Fuck that shit. You've got a magic sword. We're going to be answering your questions, and they come to me via my website on the information superhighway, www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. That's what you type into your superhighway browsertron. And there's some good ones today. There's some good ones. Fans of Swansong. We're going to start with you. We're going to start with you, fans of Swansong. Don't worry if you haven't seen Swansong. I will explain, but that's the context as we explore and understand the Randolph continuum.
Hello, Adam. I'm Streaky Haddock on YouTube, and I'm just curious, from a GMing standpoint, what's the deal with Randy? What's the purpose of bringing him up on a not frequent but regular basis? What themes or reactions or thoughts are you trying to provoke in people when you bring him up? Because it seems like he's taken on a kind of metaphysical quality, and I'm curious to know what that means. Thank you.
What's the deal with airline food? No, what's the deal with Randy? What is the deal with Randy? What is up with this mysterious Randolph, and why the fuck does he keep coming up in my campaign? Let's discuss, for the uninitiated, the cliff notes of the Randy story. So in Swansong, which is a Stars Without Number campaign that we did for roleplay so very many eons ago, one of the rules hacks that I implemented for that game, because it's an OSR game and ripe for hackery, ripe for inclusion of rules from other sets, ripe for messing with things. I had ported over from my favorite role-playing game, a mechanism called circles. And circles, in the aforementioned role-playing game, of which I am a fan, is a statistic like strength or fort or what have you, hotitude, that allows you to connect your character to the outside world. It allows you to connect your character to NPCs around them and create a character who essentially is a part of a larger world. It would flesh out the game itself with people that know the PCs in certain circumstances, and it would allow us to create a world with a little bit more interconnectedness than your usual space murder hobo simulator, right? That was my hope. My hope was that using these culture skills, it would mean something that you had culture Andoni or culture criminal or what have you. And for the players, it would allow them to create NPCs that would stick around and that would help them and that they would form relationships with and that we would get to see develop, you know, in the back end of the game, but also on screen in face to face with the players, right? It was going to create this cast of exciting characters, and I wasn't going to have to do all the work, right? I was going to be able to let the players do some of these. Oh, Adam, so naive. So naive. So in the very first episode, the very first session of Swansong, my dear friend JP, by way of his character, intergalactic cowboy conman Wilbur Higgins III, used the circles mechanisms to summon up a friendly face on an unfriendly world. Andoni was a world locked down by a cultural protectorate. Wilbur Higgins was a shall we say, a good old boy from a backwater planet. That's a pun because it was a water planet. And he needed a friend, so enter Randy. Enter Randy. Randy was the kind of guy who, yeah, he needed something. He's an NPC. NPCs that need things, they're important and powerful. They help drive the story. He needed to get off of Andoni, just like the players, but he had some resources to do it. And he was willing to share those resources with the players because, hey, you know, this is my old buddy Higgs. And me and Higgs, y'all, we go way back. Let's make a deal here, Higgins. You can imagine Randy as, if you're familiar with Borderlands, my main inspiration for Randy was Scooter. A little slow on the uptake, but y'all, he's real happy to help. Friendly guy, right? So the PCs make their way to the spaceport with Randy's help. And Randy's all excited because, you know, his good buddy Higgins has finally given him the chance to get off of Andoni and away from these space fascists. And then Higgs shot him in the back of the head. Because, you know, he didn't like loose ends. So this is a guy who we all established, not just me, we all as a group of players established Randy to have been a good friend of one of the characters. He was totally helpful, completely kind, just wanted what was best for him and for his buddy. And to this day, in the roleplay universe, getting Randied means being killed off by a PC for no reason other than to clean house. It comes up, right? And there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason that didn't just fade into the background. Because if it had, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? It would have just been like, oh, the PCs murdered somebody. That's how it goes. But the thing was, this was the first session of this campaign. And as our astute caller noticed, Randy would become a recurring thing in Swan Song. I brought Randy up a few times by way of another NPC, a character named Kalaya Bia, who was after a debt that Randy owed her, and because that became Higgs's problem, we saw Randy as a ghost, I suppose, as a metaphor for other things, come up again later in a real concrete way, right? You've transferred, like, you owed Randy a debt of aid. Randy owed someone else a debt. Randy was a complicated guy. Kalaya Bia is coming for the debt. This introduced the characters to the Midari Syndicate. And this was me just GMing. This was me just doing standard GM stuff, linking events, creating a chain of nodal points that eventually would become an arc in the campaign, right? This is nothing special. This is something happened in the game, cause and effect, right? Whatever. So Kalaya Bia was after some debt that Randy owed her, which became Higgs's problem until, spoiler warning, she also got fucking murdered by a PC. Right? The PCs would come face to face with Randy as a thing, as a recurring element in the game, again, when they would visit the planet Andoni. They'd go back to Andoni, which is where he was originally murdered because, you know, murder is a thing that planetary police forces don't tend to be into, and that would complicate their visit to Andoni. You shot someone in cold blood on a planet highly surveilled, and that's how that goes, right? And then again, much later, as a sort of fulcrum element in the grander space-time continuum, blah, blah, sci-fi horseshit of the campaign. So why did I do this? Why did this happen? Why, not just as a GM of this particular game, but as the GM generally, what was the deal with Randy as a GM tool, which is, it's the point of Streaky Haddoc's whole question here, right? Why did I do that with Andy? He's Randy's younger brother. With Randy as a sort of ludonarrative element. So for me, I like to take the most notes and pay the closest attention to the things that happen early in a campaign, right? I find that the first 3 or 4 sessions are the ripest for later reincorporation, and for the most part, the first arc that a game goes through is the arc that tends to resonate thematically throughout the whole campaign, right? An episode or 2 later, we would meet Pi, who, again, runs through the whole situation, the whole game. So paying a lot of close attention and making a lot of notes about the beginning of the campaign gives me fuel for later on. And if you're a backer of the Roleplay Patreon, you've been seeing the zines that we've been putting out. In every issue, I include a page of my notes to talk about that, to talk about the formation of Swan Song specifically as a show and campaign. But in this case, I'm doing that because I'm not the only one that gets to set the theme and tone for the game, right? The players do that. And in Swan Song, starting that game with such a heinous betrayal, albeit like kind of an amusing one, set the tone for the characters' behaviors and what they would be expected to do going forward, right? It put a stake in the ground. And as Prosper Trudeau would remind us many episodes later, the PCs of Swan Song were not good people. They were not heroes. They were bad men and women and genderless intelligence doing bad things to get by. And using Randy as an egregious and obvious example of that situation reminds the players and you, the audience, that the players made a decision, right? Because if you've watched me talk about role-playing games, if you watch me run them, role-playing games are powered by hard decisions. And in this case, that decision, that let's shoot Randy so he won't come back to bite us, that was a statement that the players were making about the world that they were in. It's a way for me to say, PCs, players, you chose this leitmotif. I am just going to reinforce it. And what, may you ask, the fuck is a leitmotif? Well, it's a motif that has died, and we pay homage to. No, leitmotif is a recurrent theme throughout a musical or literary composition associated with a particular person, idea, or situation. And in role-playing games, leitmotif can take the shape of all kinds of stuff, right? It can be narrative themes. It can be you continue to run into certain types of things. Dragons can be a leitmotif representative of something else in your game, and you continually use dragon imagery. You use descriptions of dragons. You use literal, actual dragons in your game, and that can be a thing that you recur throughout your game to get across a theme, right? Perhaps you like dragons because they represent the unaging time in the world. Perhaps you like dragons because they represent the greed of the elder races. Leitmotif is a thing that you can use to reinforce those themes. And for me, it's almost always an NPC. Almost always. You see, the reason for this, for me, is that I'm a people person. You know, I'm fundamentally like pretty asocial and sort of a pessimist when it comes to other human beings. In my day-to-day life, I don't really, like people all that much. I don't tend to socialize with them a ton. They're okay, but I'm not a big people person in that regard. I just am fascinated by people as narrative elements. I'm fascinated about their self-contained narration potential. They're so fucking useful in role-playing games to make a point or to illustrate a point. And what I mean is that as a GM, what you want to do is show your players the world that they inhabit, right? Sometimes this is literal. Sometimes this is showing them a list of options that they have to make their character, right? There are elves, dwarves, and gnomes in this world. Would you like to be an elf, a dwarf, or a gnome? These are your choices. I'm showing them to you. Fine. But generally, what you want to do is give them illustrations of real things in the world. And for me, when I want to show the players something in a way that resonates with them, that they can interact with on a meaningful level, I give them a human being or analog to interact with. Almost all of my recurrent NPCs in Mirror Shades, Swan Song, Balance of Power, Court of Swords, whatever you watch me play, either of the Apocalypse World games, Burning Wheel, I'm going to just keep listing campaigns because I do this all the time. All of my NPCs represent something about the narrative space that I would like to reinforce. So, like, for example, let's say you as a GM, you have a group of like religious rebels in your game, and they're struggling against a regime that has traditionally, put them down and created a sense of anger and tension between them and the government. They're cruel to their enemies, they're kind to their friends, and they're devout, right? You don't just have like a newscaster in the game be like, these religious rebels, they're cruel to their enemies and they're kind to their friends, right? You don't tell your players that. What you want to do is give them an example of like a rebel who lives their life with a knife in their teeth and a heart of gold, and they interact with the characters, and the characters learn, and the players learn through their characters about the thing that you want to say about the game. And then it goes even deeper than that, because these religious rebels aren't just about them. The rebels are about the struggle between spiritual freedom and governmental power, because that's what you want to talk about in your campaign. So you don't tell the players that, you show them. And for me, the best way to do that is through NPCs. Humans, things that can be interacted with, things that are fluid and changeable, but that have a core feeling or vibe to them. So for me, in this case, Randy was a symbol of two things. The characters are a bunch of backstabbing jerks, especially Higgs. They're mercenaries. They will kill anybody who gets in their way if that's what suits them. And the universe will do the same. The universe was a reflection of the PCs. This is why so many NPCs are untrustworthy. Why even the child that they carried through the whole campaign, they didn't trust not to backstab them, because they set that tone. You did it to yourself. You did. And that's what really hurts. Randy was also a symbol of responsibility that the world would expect from them. It was a way for me to show that their actions had ramifications. They were going to be real. They were going to stay real. You can't just shoot a man and get away with it unless you do work. I wanted Randy to be a stand-in for the idea that even though PCs are, by their very definition, special, justice and retribution and the past coming back to bite you are real themes that are going to happen in this game. And they set that tone, not me. I didn't have that figured out before Randy got Randied. So for you, you might find other things that work really well that reinforce the leitmotifs that you have in your game. You might find that in your campaign, recurrence of architectural elements might indicate certain things, right? You might find that revisiting a certain location, right? Randy City might be what you use. It might be colors, right? Red and orange, fall colors might indicate something recurrent in your game. And then whenever you say you enter the room and great orange banners hang from the walls, the players will begin to twig on the idea that, oh shit, orange means this in the campaign narratively, right? It might simply be certain creatures or things or whatever. You'll find things in your campaign that mean thematic weight for you. But for me, to answer the question, really, for me, it's people. I embed the narrative in the humans and elves and dwarves and cyborgs and artificial intelligences and unicorns and creatures of various sorts, I find that I can explore and nuance the conflict and the world around the players best when I think about the human angle. It makes me care about it. If you want to see an amazing example of this done subtly, well, depending on how familiar you are with leitmotif, but look up leitmotif on the internet, read about it, see how it works in music and literature. Listen to Sergei Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf. Peter and the Wolf is the musical pinnacle of this thing. It's a masterpiece of turning elements of narrative into something else. In this case, musical recurrent themes and instrumentation. So go listen to that. You will hear the wolf, right? Hear the wolf. Grab the thunder. Recurrence can be used in your game to work wonders in reinforcing aspects of the narrative with your players. And the more you practice, the better you're going to get at it. And the more subtle this art becomes. And leitmotif is best. As with so many things, it's best when it's subtle.
Hi, Adam. I'm one of 2, soon to be 3, GMs on my gaming group. I love GMing, I really do, but lately it seems like I'll run 1 or 2 sessions of one game, get bored, and then really desperately want to run a completely different game and a completely different theme to the detriment of the game I'm currently running. My question is a 2-parter, I guess. 1, am I wrong for doing this? Am I wrong for getting bored of a game in the middle of a session, or in the middle of a campaign, I guess? And 2, how can I keep interest in one game and not want to switch to a new one when I do get bored?
So no, you're not wrong for getting bored of the campaign immediately as soon as you start running it. New things are exciting and old things are boring. And you can't keep interest in a campaign once you've started to lose it because you're bored. Move on. It's not actually my answer. It's a little bit my answer. So what I mean here is that the urge to pursue novelty, first and foremost, is real. It's real and human. And in an RPG context as a GM, it can be a big change to go from the theory to the practice of a campaign. Let's talk about how it often goes for me. I'm going to give you my version of this because it happens to me too. So my players and I sit down and we discuss what kind of campaign we might like to play. We talk about the system or the setting we're interested in. We spitball cool ideas about character and what kinds of stuff we might try out, right? All these cool ideas are flying around and they start to coalesce into a kind of perfect campaign because, like with all perfect things, it's not real, right? It's theoretical. We're just spitballing ideas and throwing them around. Things are flowing like crazy. Ideas are going back and forth. Nothing's set in stone. The game is perfect because it doesn't exist. It could be anything. It's going to be the most amazing campaign of all time. We're projecting all of our hopes and dreams and desires for this campaign into some nebulous future where we're already playing it and there's so little work to do and so few opportunities for anything to go wrong. And this pre-game time is just such an amazing energy. And then we all sit down and the players construct their characters around a situation that we all work out together. And it still feels great because, again, it's more or less perfect. And as the GM, all you have to do is like listen to your players and take notes and be like, ooh, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like, I love your character idea. Oh, that's a good background. I'm going to work that into the story. We're going to like build this world and oh, it's going to be so good. And then you have that first session. And while it's so much fun to finally see those players get their characters into action and play it, suddenly you've got to contend with shit like the rules and actual play and prep. And suddenly you remember that being a GM is fucking hard work. And sometimes that bucket of ice cold water in your face can be exhilarating and exciting. And you can be like, whew, all right, gonna buckle down. This challenge is for me. I'm ready. I am ready to take it on. We are going to make good on that promise. But sometimes getting a bucket of cold water thrown in your face is like, nope, fuck this. I'm out. I don't want to do this. I want to go back to the perfect place. Let us return to Utopos. I want to go back to there when we didn't have to play the game. We just thought about how the game was going to be perfect. There's lots of reasons why that can be a problem. You know, the first session is where the game mastering rubber hits the proverbial road, and you actually have to do the work of playing the game and making fun out of it, which isn't always, you know, in and of itself any fun. So in a way, I find this part of the game the hardest to get through, because now instead of just daydreaming and imagining the potential for your game, you've got to bust your ass and make it happen. You have to continue being a good GM and taking notes and thinking about things and developing your leitmotifs and doing the work of a GM. And it's fun to do that work, but you know, hard work is hard. And hey, we haven't played Fate in a while. Maybe it'd be fun to do a sci-fi game. Right. Okay. Maybe that'd be better. Hey, does anybody else want to GM? And suddenly you're doing a different thing, right? Suddenly you're not playing the game anymore. You just don't feel like going and GMing. And listen, we're tougher and better than this, right? We're capable GMs. We can overcome this. We can do it. I don't think that it's wrong to get bored, because doing anything over and over and over can get boring. Whether it's early in the campaign or later, GMing is a work of creative energy. And like anything that takes creative energy, right? Being in a band, writing a novel, being a Twitch streamer, sometimes you get up in the morning and you're just like, I don't really feel that much like doing this today. Playing RPGs isn't always a super fun time. It's hard work too. And I know that for some people, for a lot of people, the idea that playing a game is also hard work is like kind of a weird idea. And that's okay. We're trained to see play and work as two separate things, right? They're the opposites of a spectrum in a lot of people's minds. But with role-playing games, you work hard when you play, and work can get tiring and boring, and whatever happens, I think the best thing to start doing is acknowledge that and recognize why you feel disinterested. What happened between that early, oh my God, everything's great, this is going to be the best campaign ever phase, and where you are now? Don't overthink how much time it took to get there, but think about what's different. Did the game's mechanisms not deliver on what you'd hoped? Did the situation and characters not match up the way you wanted? Are there people problems happening, right? Are bad attitudes at the table causing trouble? Scheduling an issue? Are you maybe just not as in love with 5e as you used to be? Are you holding yourself to too high a standard as a GM? Do you already hate the thing that you've just started creating? All those things and more, I'm sure, for you, can go into why you might be feeling dissatisfied and bored. And knowing that is a huge step towards fixing it. This can be difficult. Understanding our feelings can be hard because we're not used to doing it. We're used to just having them. I'm angry. Why? I don't know. I'm too angry. This is boring. Why? I don't know. This conversation bores me. But push past that. Try to understand where that boredom is coming from. And this is not a thing that I can necessarily help you with, except to reinforce that it is important and that you can do it. My main advice for your second question, you know, if you feel like you've lost that loving feeling, is that once you've started a game, stick to it. I'm a serial grouch when it comes to doing like anything at all, right? I'm a grump. I'm a cranky person. And in my head, inside my own personal narrative, whether it's playing a game, going out with friends, doing anything at all, even the stuff that I love, like streaming, I will almost always have some part of my brain that hopes somewhere that it will be out of my control, that I can't do it, right? The thing I'm about to do gets canceled. So instead, I can do nothing. I can just lay in bed and stare at the ceiling and look at my phone, no matter what it is. And for me personally, like that comes from it comes from a lifelong struggle with depression, and like it's a thing that I know is a problem. It happens to me all the time. What fixes that for me, and again, this might not work for you, but what fixes that for me is literally just fucking doing it. Forcing myself to do the thing, even just for a little bit. I don't want to write notes for office hours. I don't want to stop looking at Twitter and get out of bed and go do office hours. I don't want to stream. I don't want to. Well, fuck you, Adam. Do it. Spend 5 minutes doing the thing. The dread of doing that thing almost always fades for me. And if it doesn't, if I spend a half an hour doing something and I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm actually still not into this. That's when I start to take it seriously. And I'm like, oh, hold on. Maybe I'm done with this thing. Because for me, it's just starting that's hard. And I get that feeling of like, this campaign is like great and everybody loves it and everyone's having a good time, but I'm so fucking tired of it and I don't want to do this and I have no creative ideas and I'm garbage. But then 10 minutes in, your friends are laughing and you're rolling dice and you're like, wait a second, I fucking love role-playing games. What's wrong with me? Stupid depressed bed Adam, get the fuck out of here. Confident game master Adam has taken your place. Take a page from Apocalypse World. To do it, fucking do it. Right? But if you find yourself in that position where you are doing it and you're feeling done for real, like repeatedly, it's chronic doneness, it might be time for you to change things up. You might just be burned out on GMing because, God, I heard it. I heard it in your voice, right? You do like game mastering. You said so, and I could feel that. You said, I love GMing, but like sometimes the things we love still just are not good for us, right? Like you can love a thing. Man, I am sure that there are people that love heroin. That they're just like, you know, I love it. I love doing heroin. It does not mean that heroin is a smart choice for those people. So even though you love it, even though you love game mastering, that sweet, sweet GMing, you might need to take a break from it. If it's happening more often for you, more often, maybe your GMing muscles just need a break. Maybe you're trying to go too hard and give yourself a couple of months. You said that your group has other GMs. Let them do it, right? Let them take a turn and give yourself a little hiatus and set aside the GMing heroin for a moment and find out if you actually still love it or not. This is bad advice for actual heroin. Don't do heroin, kids. It's bad for you. Well, okay, just don't do it. It's bad. Gaming, game mastering. That's what the show is about. Anyway, I think the thing that really matters here is that there's no reason to force yourself to play games that you're not into. I know, God, I know. Once you get to that point where you're like, yeah, let's hang out and make characters and talk about the world. And oh my God, we're so fucking hype. And 2 sessions in, it's only been 2 sessions. And you're like, hey, this is boring and sucks. It's okay to have a good first couple of dates and then not do it anymore. Just because the first 2 dates were fun doesn't mean you have to love this thing forever. Say goodbye. Don't do a thing that's boring to you. If you can narrow down what's causing you to get bored, you can either fix it or don't fix it. And if there's nothing in particular, it might be that you specifically GMing for this group, it's just not working for you right now. Change things up. Change things up, take a break, come back, see how you feel. That's my advice, anyhow. Don't force yourself to play games that you're bored of. Force yourself to give them a chance. If you're like me and struggle with getting a thing started, you'll get over that. If you don't, if that's not how your brain works, if you're just bored, stop. Just stop. It's okay to stop. Don't do heroin.
Hey Adam, how do you make vehicular combat fun and interesting? This came up for me recently in a flooded Apocalypse World game, which I know is something you're familiar with. What should have been a climactic battle between two gangs on boats and jet skis fell flat, in part because I wasn't sure how to deal with the vehicles. The problem was exacerbated by the characters being in open ocean, so there wasn't even interesting terrain I could throw at them. How do you make fights on vehicles something more than one person saying, I drive closer or farther, while the rest take pot shots at the baddies?
Boats, bombs, Battlestar Galactica. So this question was submitted, I presume, prior to the release of 2nd edition Apocalypse World, because in that particular situation, Vincent Baker, dear sweet Vincent, has done what he can to answer this question for me. Yes? So, like, in the case of 2nd edition Apocalypse World, Vincent just tore a page out of the Book of Furiosa and put together some pretty cool adaptations and expansions on the existing battle stuff to give players codified rules for vehicular homicide. In particular, Vincent takes a situation that in 1st edition Apocalypse World might be like seizing by force and acting under fire, and specifically calls out the actions that he wants to encourage in the fiction of his game. Design, rules, narrative. If you make rules for shit, people will handle shit in that particular way. You're going to get stories after the fact that feel a certain way because system matters. System matters. And this is why, right? So this is the thing. It's not just about when you shoot another car, when you go real fast. Vincent specifically and intentionally chose moves to cover the kind of vehicle combat that he wanted. He wanted it to feel a certain way in Apocalypse World. So in Apocalypse World, when you are doing car fights, you can board a moving vehicle, you can outdistance another vehicle and overtake another vehicle and deal with bad terrain and shoulder another vehicle. Those are the things you can do. Those are the things that you have mechanical control over. So it's not just about fighting with vehicles in that way. It's about framing the kinds of narrative that you want your game to have. And we'll talk about how this affects you, Justice, specifically, and your GMing in a second. But in the world of Powered by the Apocalypse, especially, but in all games, moves frame the fiction. They tell the players, this is what's possible, and these are the results that will happen when you engage with that possibility space. They give the player specific results to expect from specific inputs. And we've talked about moves a bunch of times before, but essentially what they say is X action will always result in Y or Z when there's a move involved. Even if you might not like Z, you might fail and get Z anyway. But if you do X, you will get Y or Z. I don't care what else is going on. Doing X will result in those things, which really creates a funneled version of the narrative. When you make any move in the game, you can expect certain results. So in Apocalypse World, this question is answered. There are ways that vehicle combat work in that universe, and if they are interesting to you, the mechanics will create an interesting narrative. But not every game is Apocalypse World, is it? Nor would we want it to be. We see vehicle stuff in lots of games. There's vehicles because, you know, vehicle shit is a staple of the kind of fiction that as role players, we are often trying to replicate. Role-playing games like action, for the most part. Role-playing games like big scenes. And whether we're interested in dogfighting spaceships or battles on horseback, trying to kill the shit out of each other from a moving object has long been a staple of action fiction. Some games give you a set of rules for this stuff, right? Like the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game, for example, has a decent amount of rules for managing space or ground battles because that shit is hella important to Star Wars. And if you didn't include those rules, there'd be some generic rule that wouldn't feel like Star Wars, but instead you get locking on target and angling the deflector shields and warp drive and all the shit that makes it feel like Star Wars. Star Wars does this in a good way because Star Wars cares about it. Apocalypse World didn't really care that much about vehicle combat in first edition, ironically, given that the driver was a playbook. And that's why we have second editions of games. Some games, though, give you no such rules at all. And that's where you have to write your own. Right? So, in that case, because again, yes, I can give you advice on making vehicle combat narratively interesting. But, you know, if you want to have the crew of the USS Enterprise, you know, fight off a squadron of TIE fighters on their way to Alderaan, you know, you're gonna need rules, because rules are what create the narrative. So here's what I would do. Here's what I would do if I were in that situation. If I were playing a game and the game fucked me because it doesn't have rules for a thing that I'm supposed to care about, and I'm trying to do this thing, and otherwise it's boring, I would look at what the game does similarly, right? Does the game have rules for other stuff that is like what I'm already trying to do? Does this game have rules for vehicles that are not boats? Can I adapt them? Right? Is that possible? Modify those rules, use them as a base, modify those rules to fit what you want your fiction to feel like, and then playtest it a bunch, and then include it in your game. And then, once you've done that, once you've playtested it a bunch, never use it because you hate it, the campaign is over, and you played it too much anyway, and you're never going to use it for anything. That last step is, it's optional. You don't have to hate it. But what does the game already do that's like this? How can I modify it to fit what I want? Is it mechanically sound? I think the real trick here is that with vehicle stuff, narratively, if you're not doing like a squadron of F-wings or whatever, you run into the same problem that hacking has in cyberpunk games, or the problem that like that one dude that plays Burning Wheel who insists on being a duelist and using fight to resolve everything and taking up 2 hours of every session. In a crew of a pilot, a gunner, a medic, and an engineer, you can bet that 3/4 of that team is going to have something to do when the Decade Pigeon gets attacked by Emperor Bad Guy. And in that case, being real with your premise from the get-go is important. You want to let the person who's playing the medic know that, you know, when the Grand Space Armada shows up and we're going to do the big chase scene and everything, because you know that's how this is going to go because this is sci-fi, you might not have that much to do. Is that okay? Buy-in, right? And not everybody has to do stuff every second of every session, right? The medic can always C-3PO that shit. The pilot always needs somebody backseating them. And as for the narrative itself, I think you're right about creating a more interesting environment. In the same way that sword fights in a 20 by 20 room are always less interesting than sword fights on the battlement of a burning castle, notice how Star Wars doesn't have like a bunch of spaceships fighting each other in empty space. They're fighting around a bunch of capital ships, or they're on a planet among chasms and wreckage, or they're flying over the surface of a giant space station. This is why space combat in Star Trek is so fucking boring, because it's like submarines drifting slowly through space. Conflict plus context equals interesting stuff. The other thing you can do, assuming that you already have rules that you like and you're getting good at contextualizing your boat fights, is talk to your players about what kinds of stuff that they like about fighting at sea. Do they like, you know, big cannons and blasting stuff out of the water? Do they like boarding action, right? Do they want cutlass in their teeth, jumping from ship to ship? Do they want erotically charged submarine chases? Listen, when it comes to this stuff, what you got to do is ask your players and then do whatever floats your boat. Get it? Because submarines, boats. Yeah. All right. So this has been Office Hours. It's full of erotically charged submarine chases, space battles, a dead guy with a laser hole in the back of his head, and struggling with how to be excited about a thing that you might not be excited about anymore. I thank you for visiting the office, and especially for submitting your questions. If you want to do that, if you want to get in on this action, you can hit up www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. There's a form there. Fill it out. Record your voice. I will add you to roster of questions, and we'll answer them as they come in. As always, this episode will go live on YouTube. If you missed the first 2 questions or just want to catch up, there's a playlist on my YouTube channel. New episodes live every Thursday at 3 o'clock. And next week we will be skipping an episode. It's the 6th of December next week. So episode 32 will be the week after because I'm going to be in Colorado on a little vacation. So take that opportunity to submit your questions, and we will see you next time on Office Hours. Thanks for coming, everybody.